I complimented the alien woman. Her reply was completely unexpected. Armand had been traveling for nearly 10 hours, moving from one city to another for work. He was tired, and every part of him wanted nothing more than to get on the plane and close his eyes until he landed at home. The airport was busy, as usual. People rushing by with their luggage, their eyes fixed on departure boards or phones. Announcements echoed across the hall, blending with the soft hum of conversation and rolling suitcases. Armand moved slowly, dragging his bag behind him, feeling the weight of exhaustion.
He had just stopped by a small cafe near his gate to grab a cup of coffee. Dear B.
The line was long, but he didn't mind waiting. He needed the caffeine to push through the weariness. While waiting, his eyes wandered around the lounge, watching people as they hurried along. Families hugged each other goodbye, business travelers typed quickly on laptops, and children chased each other around the waiting area. Then he noticed her. She wasn't loud or demanding like some people in the airport. She sat alone at a small table near the window, reading a thick book. Something about her immediately caught his attention. It wasn't her clothes, exactly, though they were unusual, elegant in a way that didn't look like she was trying to stand out. It was more than that. There was a calm, quiet confidence in her posture, a sort of serenity that didn't belong in the busy chaos of the airport. She moved slowly, deliberately, sipping her coffee and turning pages with care, her eyes completely absorbed in the book. Armand felt a strange pull, a curiosity he couldn't explain. He had seen many people in his life, but there was something about her that felt different, almost like she didn't belong to the world everyone else was rushing through. He frowned slightly at himself for thinking this way. It sounded strange, even silly. But he couldn't look away. After a few minutes, he realized he had been staring, and quickly looked down at his phone, pretending to check messages. But the thought of her lingered in his mind. Then, impulsively, he made a decision. He would speak to her. Something about her made him feel like it wouldn't be awkward, that she might actually understand someone noticing her differently. Armand walked over slowly, trying not to seem too obvious, though his heart had started to race. She looked up from her book for a brief moment, and their eyes met. He noticed her gaze wasn't judgmental or curious in a normal way. It was steady, calm, and somehow measured. It made him pause, and he felt his palms get a little sweaty. He cleared his throat and said softly, "Excuse me, I just wanted to say, I really like the way you carry yourself. It's different, but in a good way."
For a moment, she didn't respond.
She simply looked at him, her eyes studying him as if she were weighing something carefully. Then she closed her book slowly and set it down on the table. Her lips curved into a very faint smile, and she said in a calm, almost melodic voice, "Most people only see what they want to see. You see more." Armand blinked. He wasn't sure he understood her response. It was unexpected, and it made him feel both confused and intrigued. He had expected a polite "thank you," or maybe a small smile, not a statement that sounded thoughtful, as if she had read right through him. Thank you, I guess, he said, scratching the back of his neck nervously. "I didn't mean anything strange. I just noticed you."
She tilted her head slightly and studied him again, her expression unreadable.
"I know. That's why I said it. Not many people notice, even when they look." Armand felt a little embarrassed. He hadn't meant to make her uncomfortable. "Oh!" But her calm demeanor was comforting rather than intimidating, and he felt a strange courage rising in him. He pulled out a chair and asked quietly, "Do you mind if I sit for a moment?"
She hesitated for a second, then nodded slightly. "You may." As he sat, The world around them continued its hurried rhythm.
People rushed by, boarding announcements played, children laughed and cried, and the smell of coffee filled the air. Yet in that small corner near the window, it felt almost like time had slowed. Armin found himself paying more attention to her than the chaos around them.
He glanced at the book she had been reading.
"That looks interesting," he said. "What is it about?" She picked up the book and held it delicately, as though it were fragile. "It's about how people see the world and how rarely they see themselves. Most people live without noticing what truly matters," she said. Her words were simple, but there was a depth to them that made Armand stop and think.
That's actually very true," he admitted.
"I think most of us just go through life without really noticing much of anything. We're too busy, too distracted." She smiled faintly, as though she had expected him to say that.
"Exactly. You notice something about me."
"That alone tells me more about you than you realize." Armin felt a warmth in his chest. There was something real in her words, something that made him feel like this encounter wasn't random.
He wanted to ask her more questions, to understand her perspective, but he also didn't want to overstep.
For the next few minutes, they sat in silence. He watched her take small sips of her coffee, and she watched him occasionally, with that same calm, measured gaze. There was a strange comfort in her presence, like she was quietly challenging him to think, to notice more about the world, about himself. Then she spoke again.
"Why do people always compliment appearances?" she asked. "Most people see only the surface." You notice something deeper. That is rare." Armand nodded slowly, feeling both shy and proud. "I guess I just say what I feel."
Sometimes people miss things, and it feels good to point them out, even small things. She closed her book completely now and leaned back slightly. Small things often matter the most. "You saw me."
You notice something that others ignore. That matters.
Armand realized she wasn't being flirtatious or mysterious for no reason. She was genuinely observing, and her response was a reflection of how she saw the world. It was a lesson, a gentle nudge to pay attention, to notice more than just the obvious. They didn't speak much after that for a while. The quiet between them was comfortable, not awkward. Armand felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in months, maybe years. Being around her, even for a few minutes, made the airport seem less noisy, less rushed. It was like he had found a quiet corner of clarity in the middle of chaos. Finally, Armand realized his gate was being called. He felt a pang of disappointment at having to leave this strange, unexpected moment behind.
"I should probably go," he said reluctantly. She nodded, picking up her book again. "Go! But remember what you noticed today!"
"It's rare, and it's valuable."
He smiled, feeling both lighter and more aware than when he had arrived. "I'll remember," he said. As he walked toward his gate, he kept looking over his shoulder.
She returned to her reading, absorbed, serene, and almost otherworldly. The memory of her calm gaze, her unexpected words, and the gentle challenge in her compliment stayed with him. For some reason, it felt like the beginning of something that could change how he viewed the world, even in small ways. By the time he boarded the plane, Armand's mind was buzzing, not with work, deadlines, or schedules, but with curiosity, reflection, and a surprising sense of wonder. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had seemed so different, so unusual in a quiet, unassuming way. It wasn't about where she came from or why she dressed that way. It was about the way she made him see things differently, and deep down, he knew this encounter was just the start. Something about her words, her presence, and her calm certainty had left a mark on him that he couldn't ignore. He had no idea what it all meant yet, but he wanted to understand. Even as the plane lifted off the ground and the city lights shrank below him, Armand thought of her smile, and her eyes, and he felt a quiet anticipation, a sense that this unexpected meeting was not just a fleeting moment, but the beginning of a story he couldn't yet imagine. After that brief encounter at the airport, Armand couldn't stop thinking about her. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see her calm face, the faint smile, the way she held her book. It was unusual for him to be so affected by a stranger, but something about her had unsettled him in a good way. He felt like he had glimpsed someone who didn't just exist in the world but actually noticed it. Really noticed it. The next few days were a blur of meetings, deadlines, and emails. But no matter how busy he became, his mind kept drifting back to that woman. Both people only see what they want to see. Most people only see what they want to see. You see more. The words felt heavy, like they carried a lesson he couldn't yet fully understand. Armand found himself questioning how often he went through life on autopilot. How often had he ignored the little details around him, the subtle ways people expressed themselves, or the quiet moments that mattered more than he realized. Her words made him reflect, and even at work he noticed things he usually overlooked. A colleague's tired eyes, a janitor quietly cleaning the office, the way sunlight hit the conference room at a certain hour. It was strange to think that a few words from a stranger could change how he viewed the world. But he couldn't shake the curiosity. He wanted to see her again, not just because she was unusual, but because she had made him think, made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Awareness.
A week later, by what seemed like coincidence, Armand found himself back at the airport.
He wasn't scheduled to fly anywhere, but he had an appointment in the city, and arriving early gave him some quiet time. As he wandered near the lounges and gates, he half hoped he might see her again. At first, there was no sign of her. People rushed past him in all directions, luggage wheels squeaking against the floor, announcements echoing through the hall. He stopped by the same cafe where he had met her before, scanning the tables. And then he saw her. She was sitting in the same corner, almost as if the spot had been reserved for her alone. Her book was open, her coffee untouched, and she seemed completely absorbed in her reading. But the moment she looked up, their eyes met. Armand's heart skipped a beat. This time he didn't hesitate. He walked over, trying to appear calm, though he felt a nervous energy buzzing through him.
"Hi," he said softly. I
didn't expect to see you here again." She closed her book slowly and gave him a faint, thoughtful smile. "Perhaps it is not a coincidence," she said. Her voice was calm and steady, carrying a tone that seemed almost musical. "Or perhaps you were meant to notice more than once."
Armand felt a shiver of curiosity. Her words, again, felt like a puzzle.
He took the seat across from her. I guess maybe.
"I mean, I've been thinking a lot about what you said last time." She tilted her head slightly, her eyes watching him closely. "And what did you notice?" she asked. I realized how often I go through life without really seeing anything. You made me think about noticing more, paying attention to the small things."
Her smile widened slightly, and she leaned back.
"Good! That is why words matter." A simple sentence can change perspective if it is heard by the right person.
They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the airport fading into the background.
Armand felt an odd sense of calm, like the world had slowed just for him. He wanted to ask her about her life, to know why she spoke in such unusual ways, but he didn't want to seem intrusive. "So," he began carefully, "you have a very unique way of looking at things. Do you always see the world like this?" She paused, as if weighing her answer. I do, she finally said. I notice things most people ignore. I think it helps me understand life better, even if it makes others think I am strange. Strange? Armin repeated, smiling faintly. No, it's just different. In a good way. I wish I could see the world like that. You can, she said softly, if you choose to notice, if you choose to see what others ignore. Her gaze held his, steady and unwavering. Most people never try. They only see what is in front of them, what is easy, what comforts them. Now, few noticed the depth beneath. Arman nodded slowly. He felt a quiet excitement rising in him. Talking to her was like opening a door he hadn't known existed. He wanted to step through, to see the world the way she did. For the next hour, they spoke quietly, their conversation flowing naturally despite the constant activity around them. She spoke in metaphors and examples that made Armin think, and he shared his own reflections, feeling comfortable in a way he rarely did with strangers.
She wasn't intimidating exactly, but she challenged him to think and to feel.
At one point, she asked him a question that stopped him in his tracks. Do you ever notice yourself, or do you only notice the world? Arman blinked. He hadn't expected that question. I think I notice the world, he admitted. But maybe not myself enough. I get caught up in routines, work, responsibilities, and I forget to reflect. She nodded slowly, as if she had expected him to say that. Reflection is rare, yet necessary. The more you understand yourself, the more you understand everything else. Armin felt a sudden clarity. Her words weren't just about her. They were about him, and everyone else too. She wasn't lecturing. She was guiding, helping him see in a way he hadn't before. After a while, Arman realized the time had flown by. His boarding gate was being called, and he knew he had to leave. I should go, he said reluctantly. She closed her book again and looked at him with that calm, knowing expression.
Go. But remember, noticing is not just for others.
Notice yourself as well. It matters. He smiled, feeling both challenged and inspired. I'll try. I really will. As he walked toward the gate, he felt a strange mixture of anticipation and peace. This encounter, unlike anything he had expected, was changing the way he saw things. Not just in the airport, not just in other people, but in himself. He reached the gate, boarding pass in hand, and glanced back once more. She was still sitting there, serene and quiet, absorbed in her book. He realized then that this wasn't about meeting someone new or unusual. It was about an idea, a lesson, a perspective. She had given him a gift without even intending to. The plane took off, and Arman found himself looking out the window, the city lights shrinking beneath him. He thought about her words, her calm presence, and the way she made him feel. For the first time in a long time, he felt aware of himself, aware of the world, aware of the small moments that made life meaningful. When he landed at his destination, he felt restless, but energized. He couldn't stop thinking about her, and he couldn't stop reflecting on what she had said. Something inside him had shifted, like a door that had been locked for years had suddenly been opened. Days went by, and Arman found himself looking for her again, wondering if he would ever see her. He didn't know if it would happen, but the hope alone made his days brighter. He replayed their conversation repeatedly, analyzing every word, trying to understand her perspective more deeply. Then, one evening, as he sat at his desk working, a message appeared on his phone. It was from an unknown number. Hesitant, he opened it, and the words made his heart race. I hope you noticed more today than you realized. That is what matters. It was her. Armin stared at the message, stunned. His mind raced with questions, excitement, and curiosity. He couldn't believe she had reached out. This wasn't just a fleeting encounter anymore. It was the start of something unexpected, something that might teach him even more about noticing, reflecting, and understanding the world. He typed a reply quickly but carefully. I did notice, more than I realized at first. Your words, they've made me see a lot differently. Thank you. A few moments later, her reply appeared. Good. Keep noticing.
That is where the real story begins. Armin sat back in his chair, feeling a strange sense of anticipation.
He didn't know what would happen next, but he was eager to find out. This woman, who seemed so calm, so unusual, so almost alien in the way she saw the world, had changed something inside him, and he knew somehow that their story was far from over. For the first time in a long time, he felt alive, not in the ordinary sense, but in a way that mattered. The ordinary world could wait. He had a new perspective, and that perspective had been gifted to him by someone completely unexpected, someone extraordinary in the most ordinary of places. After receiving her message, Armand couldn't focus on anything else. His work documents, emails, and reports seemed unimportant now, fading into the background of his mind. Her words replayed over and over. Keep noticing. That is where the real story begins. What did she mean by that? What story was she talking about? He spent the evening reflecting quietly. Sitting at his desk, he stared out the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Something about her perspective had opened a new door in his mind, a door he hadn't realized existed. He had always moved through life quickly, focused on goals and routines, often too busy to pause. But she had reminded him of something simple yet profound. Noticing mattered. The next morning, Armin woke up early, unusually alert. He brewed a cup of coffee and sat at his kitchen table, thinking about her. He tried to recall every detail about her. The way she held her book, the calmness in her eyes, the quiet confidence in her posture. Even the way she spoke had stayed with him. There was a rhythm to her words, a thoughtfulness that was rare. She made him feel like he had glimpsed a world beyond the ordinary, a perspective that wasn't about grand gestures, but small, meaningful observations. He decided he wanted to understand her more, not in a romantic sense, but in a human sense. DJ's face has been busy at the time too well, but it's kind of crying and of tear, the usual spirit of DJs, a place where I didn't know anything. But when it had passed, the time twos would place something. Just in sight of, Armin started small. During the day, he paid attention to his surroundings. He noticed the way sunlight reflected on the glass buildings, the pattern of leaves swaying in the wind, the tired but determined expressions on people walking past him. He noticed more at work, too, how his colleagues reacted to challenges, how the janitor moved silently along the corridors, how small acts of kindness went unseen. Every observation reminded him of her words. Notice, see more, reflect. Days passed and the memory of their meeting grew stronger rather than fading. He thought about reaching out again, but he hesitated. He didn't want to seem intrusive or impatient. He didn't know her well enough to risk misunderstanding. But the curiosity, the need to understand, was too strong to ignore. He began checking the cafe website, hoping to see if she might visit again. He even checked social media lightly, trying not to appear obsessive, but he wanted any sign, any clue that he might see her again. One evening, as he walked home from work, his phone buzzed. It was her again. His heart skipped a beat before he even looked at the screen.
Are you noticing enough today? The message read.
Armand smiled, feeling both nervous and excited.
He typed back quickly, "I'm trying."
I notice more every day because of you. Thank you for reminding me.
Her reply came almost immediately, "Good reflection is practice."
The more you do it, the more clarity you gain. Some things will surprise you when you notice carefully. Armin stared at the message. She was right. Life had been moving fast, but when he took a moment to slow down and observe, he realized how much he had missed. The small details, the quiet moments, the gestures that went unnoticed, they all held meaning if he took the time to see them. The next weekend, Armand decided to visit the airport again. It wasn't because he expected to meet her immediately, but because he wanted to be in a space where he first noticed the change within himself. Walking through the terminals, he felt a strange mixture of hope and nervousness. Every time he passed the cafe, he looked for her. The airport felt different now. It wasn't just a busy place full of travelers. It was alive with stories, with little moments that mattered, and he felt ready to notice them all. Finally, he saw her. She was in the same corner as before, calm and composed, with a new book in her hands. Their eyes met briefly, and she gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. Armin felt a rush of relief and excitement. He approached her slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hi," he said softly. "I thought I might find you here again." She closed her book gently and looked at him. "Perhaps you were meant to find me," she said, her voice calm but carrying the same weight of thoughtfulness he remembered. "Or perhaps you have finally begun to notice more than the surface. I think I am," Armin admitted. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I realize I haven't been seeing much in my life." "Not really. You made me notice things I didn't before." Her gaze softened slightly. "Good. That is the first step. Reflection is not easy for most people. Observation requires patience and honesty." Armand nodded, feeling a quiet warmth in his chest. He wanted to ask her more questions about her life, but he hesitated. He didn't know if it was appropriate, and he didn't want to rush anything.
Instead, he said, "Can I sit with you for a moment?" She considered him for a brief moment, and then nodded.
"You may." As he sat, he noticed something he hadn't before. The way she observed her surroundings even while reading, the slight tilt of her head as she listened to ambient sounds, the way she seemed completely present. It was as if she were part of the world but not completely attached to it, and that detachment gave her clarity. Armand realized that this was what had drawn him to her in the first place. They talked quietly, their conversation flowing naturally, despite the bustle of the airport. She spoke about noticing subtle changes in people's expressions, about the patterns in everyday life, and how small choices could have unexpected impacts.
Armin shared his reflections, telling her about the little details he had begun to observe in his own life.
"You've changed in just a few days," she said thoughtfully. "Most people never notice this quickly. Most people stay blind to small truths because it is uncomfortable to see beyond the surface." Armand smiled, feeling proud yet humbled. "I guess I just didn't know how much I was missing. You made me see that noticing matters more than I realized."
She nodded. "Yes."
Most people rush through life, afraid to see deeply. But noticing allows understanding, and understanding allows connection, not just with others, but with oneself. Her words stayed with him long after they parted that day. He felt like he had glimpsed a part of life that was usually hidden, a world within the world that only those who paused could see. For the first time in years, he felt fully awake, fully aware, and fully alive. After leaving the airport, Armand walked slowly through the city streets, thinking about everything she had said. Every gesture, every small detail he noticed, every interaction he had with people began to take on new meaning. He realized that his life had been full of noise and distraction, but now even ordinary moments held significance. He started keeping a small notebook in his bag, jotting down observations, thoughts, and reflections. He wrote about the expressions of people he passed on the street, the way sunlight fell on buildings, the fleeting moments of kindness he saw in strangers. Each note reminded him of her words, of the encounter that had shifted something inside him. A few days later, another message appeared on his phone. It was her again. "You are noticing more than you think, but observation alone is not enough. Reflection deepens what you see." Arman smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude. He replied, "I am trying. Every day, I see more and I reflect more." "Your words have made a difference." Her reply was simple, but it carried the same calm weight as before. "Good. Keep going. What you notice now will shape the person you become." Arman realized that he had begun to look forward to these messages, not because of their sender, but because of the lessons they carried. They reminded him to pause, to observe, and to reflect. And more than that, they reminded him that life was full of small, meaningful moments, if one only paid attention. The days continued in this rhythm. Arman noticed more, reflected more, and found himself growing in ways he hadn't imagined. He didn't know much about her life, where she came from, or why she was so unusual, but he didn't need to. Her presence, even from a distance, had become a guide, a quiet, thoughtful influence that helped him see beyond the ordinary. He knew he wanted to meet her again in person, to learn more, to continue the lessons she had begun. But he also understood that some things couldn't be rushed. He had to observe, reflect, and grow, just as she had taught him. The story she had started was unfolding slowly, one observation at a time, and he was eager to see where it would lead. And in the quiet moments, when he sat with his notebook or walked through the city streets, he thought of her calm presence, and the unexpected gift she had given him.
The ability to truly see and to notice that life was far richer than he had ever imagined. Arman had been noticing the world differently for weeks now.
Every small detail, every quiet moment, every unspoken gesture, he observed it all, just as she had taught him. And yet, despite all his reflection and the messages they had exchanged, he still felt a longing to see her in person again. There was something about her presence that couldn't be captured through words on a screen. He wanted to experience it, to feel the calm awareness she carried, and to continue learning from her quiet wisdom. One bright Saturday morning, Arman decided to go back to the airport. Not because he had to travel, but because he wanted to immerse himself in the place where everything had started. He arrived early, enjoying the hum of travelers, the rolling of suitcases, and the faint aroma of coffee from the cafe where he had first met her. The airport no longer felt chaotic or rushed to him. It was alive with small details waiting to be noticed. He walked past the cafes and waiting areas, scanning each table carefully. He felt a familiar flutter of anticipation in his chest. And then he saw her, sitting exactly where she had before, calm and composed, a book in her hands, her coffee steaming softly beside her. Their eyes met briefly, and she gave him a faint, welcoming smile. It was not the smile of someone flirting or teasing, but of someone who recognized a familiar presence, a shared understanding.
Arman approached slowly, trying to contain his nervous excitement.
"Hi," he said softly. "I thought I might find you here again." She closed her book gently, setting it down on the table. "Perhaps you were meant to," she said, her calm voice carrying the same quiet authority that had first intrigued him. "Or perhaps you have finally learned to notice more fully. I think I have," Arman admitted. "Not just small things, but everything around me. You've changed how I see the world." Her gaze softened, as though she had expected him to say this. Good. That is the purpose. Observation alone is not enough. Understanding comes from reflection and awareness combined. He smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. I've kept a notebook, he said, almost shyly. Every day I write down things I notice, little moments, gestures, expressions. Everything? She nodded approvingly. Then you are practicing what few choose to learn. You are shaping yourself through observation and reflection. That is rare. For a long while they sat in silence, letting the noise of the airport wash over them without distraction. Armin noticed the subtle way she observed her surroundings even while seated, the way her eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in people, patterns, and movements. It wasn't an intrusion, it was an act of awareness, a quiet study of life itself. He felt inspired and humbled. I wanted to thank you, Armin said quietly. Not just for your words, but for showing me a different way to see things. Life feels fuller now, not richer. She smiled faintly, her gaze steady. The gift was never mine to give. I merely reminded you to open your eyes. The change comes from within yourself. Armin nodded, understanding. Her words weren't about flattery or recognition. They were about empowerment. She had taught him something more valuable than any advice he had ever received. How to truly notice, reflect, and understand.
He took a deep breath. Can I ask you something? Of course, she replied. Why
do you teach people this? Why do you share your perspective? He asked. He leaned back slightly, her eyes thoughtful. Because most people never learn to see. They live busy lives, distracted, blind to what matters most. If I can help someone notice even a little, even for a moment, it changes them. And when people change, even slightly, the world changes too. Arman felt a profound sense of awe. It wasn't about him personally. It was about the ripple effect of awareness, of noticing and understanding. He realized that her calm demeanor and unusual perspective were not alien in the literal sense. She was simply extraordinary in how deeply she observed the world and chose to act with insight. For the next hour, they talked quietly, each word deliberate, each thought meaningful. She shared examples of how noticing small details had helped her navigate difficult situations in life, how observing gestures and moods had allowed her to respond with care and understanding. Armand shared his own reflections, telling her about moments in the past weeks where he had paused to notice, and how it had changed his perception of people and life around him. See? She said, gently, after he described noticing a stranger's small act of kindness. When you pay attention, you notice truth and beauty that would otherwise pass unseen. That is the practice of life. Armand felt a sense of completion, yet also a sense of curiosity. He wanted to ask more, to continue learning, but he also realized that some lessons were not about questions and answers. They were about awareness and presence. Finally, the time came when Armand had to leave. His boarding pass was tucked in his pocket, but he felt no urgency to rush. He stood, looking at her, feeling a gratitude he could not fully express.
Thank you, he said softly.
For everything. For noticing me when I didn't notice myself, and for showing me a different way to see life. She smiled faintly, her calm expression warm.
The noticing was always yours to do. I merely reminded you. Remember that life is full of small truths. Keep observing, keep reflecting. That is all that matters. Armand nodded, feeling the weight and significance of her words.
As he walked away, he noticed the world around him in a way he never had before. The passengers moving with purpose, the sunlight reflecting off the glass walls, the quiet gestures of people helping each other. the pattern of shadows on the floor. They all felt alive, meaningful. He walked through the airport slowly, taking in everything, understanding that the encounter he had shared with her was more than a chance meeting. It had been a turning point, a lesson, and a reminder that life was far richer when observed deeply. Days passed, and Armand continued his practice of noticing. He observed more, reflected more, and appreciated more. Life became a series of moments, each holding subtle significance. He no longer rushed blindly through routines or conversations. He listened, he observed, he reflected, and he found meaning even in the smallest gestures. Then, one quiet evening, as he sat in his favorite cafe, writing in his notebook, he received another message from her.
You are seeing now. That is enough.
Remember, noticing is the first step. Living it is the journey. Armand smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. He understood now that her presence in his life had never been about romance, drama, or excitement. It had been about awakening. She had reminded him that life's richness lay in the small details, the quiet reflections, and the thoughtful observations. He closed his notebook and looked out the window at the city lights, each glowing light a story, a moment, a detail, waiting to be noticed. And he understood that the real journey, the one she had introduced him to, was just beginning. From that day on, Armand approached life differently. He noticed the subtle beauty in the ordinary, the kindness in strangers, and the quiet strength in simple moments. Every day was full of discovery, reflection, and meaning, and whenever he thought of her, he felt gratitude, not for a person, but for the perspective she had shared, the awareness she had inspired, and the reminder that noticing truly changes everything. He never forgot her words, her calm presence, or the quiet lesson she had given him. Life was no longer something to rush through. It was something to observe, understand, and appreciate. And in that, he found a richness, a depth, and a quiet joy he had never known before. Armand realized that some encounters are rare, fleeting, and unexpected, but their impact lasts a lifetime. She had been that encounter for him, the one person who reminded him to see more, notice more, and live more fully. And in that lesson, he had found a gift far more valuable than he could have imagined. He smiled softly, his eyes on the world around him. Life was full of stories, and he had finally learned to notice them all.